The forgotten kingdom of Aeloria. Long before the great maps of the world were drawn and long before the oceans were given names by sailors and explorers, there existed a vast and ancient kingdom known as Aeloria. It was a land of wide green valleys, silver rivers, deep forests, and towering mountains that seemed to touch the sky. The people who lived there believed that their kingdom had been blessed by the stars themselves. They said that in the earliest age of the world, when the heavens were closer to the earth, a rain of falling stars struck the land and filled it with a quiet magic that lived in the soil, the water, and even in the wind that moved through the trees. Because of this, Aeloria grew strong and beautiful. Crops grew easily in the fertile valleys, animals roamed the forests in great numbers, and the rivers carried fresh water from the mountains down to the distant plains. Villages spread across the land, and at the center of the kingdom stood the great city of Valerian. It was a city of tall white towers and wide stone roads, surrounded by strong walls that had protected the people for generations. In the highest tower of the royal palace lived the king, a man named Eldric. King Eldric was known throughout the land as Eldric the Wise. He had ruled the kingdom for many years, and the people trusted him because he cared deeply for their lives and their future. Unlike many rulers in other lands, he did not seek conquest or glory in battle. Instead, he believed that a strong kingdom was built through peace, fairness, and knowledge. He often walked among the people without a crown or guards, speaking with farmers, craftsmen, and travelers who came from distant lands. For many years, Aeloria lived in peace under his rule. Merchants traveled freely across the kingdom's roads, bringing goods and stories from other lands. Children played in the streets of the villages, and the forests remained quiet and full of life. Yet even during these peaceful years, the oldest scholars in the royal libraries sometimes whispered about the ancient legends of the land. They spoke of prophecies hidden in forgotten scrolls and warnings left by civilizations that had lived and vanished long before Aeloria was founded. One cold winter evening, when snow covered the rooftops of Valerian and the wind blew strongly from the northern mountains, a mysterious traveler arrived at the city gates. The guards saw that the traveler was an old woman wrapped in a worn gray cloak. Her hair was white like frost, and though she looked weak and tired, there was something powerful in the way she stood. The guards hesitated, but the woman spoke firmly and asked to see the king. Something in her voice made them uneasy, so they sent word to the palace. Soon she was brought into the great hall where King Eldric sat before the royal court. The hall was filled with nobles, advisors, and soldiers, all curious about the strange visitor. When the woman stepped forward, the hall grew silent. She told the king that she was a seer, one who could see glimpses of the future in dreams and visions. Then she spoke of a terrible darkness rising in the east. According to her vision, a powerful warlord would soon unite many armies and begin conquering kingdoms across the land. Cities would burn, entire nations would fall, and the shadow of war would spread farther than anyone could imagine. The king listened carefully, though many in the court doubted her words. When she finished speaking of the coming darkness, Eldric asked if there was any hope for Aeloria. The old seer lifted her hand and pointed toward the night sky beyond the tall palace windows. She said that when a great comet returned to the sky, a child would be born somewhere in the kingdom under the light of that falling star. That child would carry a power connected to the ancient magic that had once fallen from the heavens. According to her prophecy, that child would one day face the rising darkness and decide the fate of the entire kingdom. The court was filled with murmurs and confusion, but before anyone could ask more questions, the old seer simply turned and walked away. By the next morning, she had disappeared from the city and was never seen again. Years passed, and life in Aeloria continued peacefully. Many people slowly forgot about the strange prophecy, thinking it had simply been the words of a wandering mystic. But King Eldric did not forget. Sometimes, when he stood alone in the palace towers at night, he would look toward the eastern horizon and wonder if the darkness the seer had described was already growing somewhere beyond the mountains. Then one night, many years later, something extraordinary happened. A bright comet appeared in the sky, brighter than any star the people had ever seen. It moved slowly across the heavens, leaving a long glowing trail behind it that illuminated the night like a second moon. People across the kingdom came out of their homes to watch the strange and beautiful sight. That same night, in a small village near the western forest, a child was born. The village was simple and quiet, a place where most families were farmers or craftsmen. The child's father was a blacksmith named Darian, a strong and hard-working man who spent his days shaping iron tools and horseshoes for the villagers. His wife, Mira, was known for her kindness and her gentle voice. When their son was born, the midwife noticed something unusual. On the child's shoulder was a small birthmark shaped like a star. They named the boy Aaron. Aaron grew up like any other child in the village, though those who knew him often said there was something different about him. He was curious about everything and always eager to explore beyond the village fields. While other children spent their days playing near the houses, Aaron often wandered into the edges of the forest, climbing rocks, following animal tracks, and searching for old ruins hidden among the trees. As he grew older, he began having strange dreams. In these dreams, he saw a tall, dark figure standing in burning cities. He saw armies marching across endless plains. He saw a sword buried deep within a mountain of stone, glowing with pale light. At first he told no one about these dreams, believing they were simply imagination. But far to the east, the world was beginning to change. Beyond the deserts and broken lands that separated Aeloria from distant kingdoms, a warlord named Malrath had begun conquering everything in his path. Malrath was a man feared even by his own soldiers. He wore armor as black as night and carried a massive blade said to be forged in forbidden fire. Some whispered that he had made a pact with ancient dark forces that lived beneath the earth. Wherever Malratha's armies marched, destruction followed. Villages were burned, cities were conquered, and rulers who refused to kneel were destroyed along with their kingdoms. His army grew larger with every victory, filled with soldiers who followed him out of fear or ambition. Rumors of these events slowly reached Aeloria through traveling merchants and refugees who had escaped the Eastern Wars. When these stories reached King Eldric, he felt a deep unease in his heart. The old prophecy returned to his thoughts, and he began to fear that the darkness the seer had spoken of had finally begun to rise. Meanwhile, Aaron continued growing into a strong young man. By the age of 17, he had become skilled at working in his father's forge, shaping metal with strength and precision. Yet his dreams never stopped. If anything, they grew more vivid with each passing year. One day, a traveler arrived in the village. He was a knight of the royal guard named Sir Calin, a tall man with weathered armor and a long scar across his cheek. He had spent many years traveling across the kingdom on a secret mission given to him by the king himself. Sir Calin had been searching for the child of the prophecy. When he saw the star-shaped birthmark on Aaron's shoulder, he felt a chill run through him. After speaking with the young man and hearing about his dreams, the knight realized that his long search might finally be over. That night, he told Aaron the story of the prophecy and the rising darkness in the east. At first Aaron could hardly believe it. He had always seen himself as nothing more than a blacksmith's son from a quiet village. The idea that he might somehow be connected to the fate of the entire kingdom seemed impossible. But deep inside, he felt that the knight's words were true. The dreams he had carried for so many years suddenly began to make sense. So before the sun rose the next morning, Aaron left the village with Sir Calin, beginning a journey that would take him across mountains, forests, and ancient lands long forgotten by the world. Neither of them knew it yet, but the fate of Aeloria, and perhaps the fate of the entire world, would soon rest in the hands of the boy who had been born beneath the falling star. Long before the modern kingdoms were built and long before the oceans were fully explored, there existed a powerful empire that ruled the coasts of a vast and mysterious sea. This empire was known as Thalarin, and its people believed that their destiny had been written in the waves long before the first stone of their cities was ever placed upon the shore. The Silver Sea stretched farther than any sailor could travel in a single season. Its waters shone like polished metal when the sun rose each morning, and in the quiet nights the moon turned the waves into endless moving mirrors. On its western coast stood the capital city of the empire, Aeloria, a place of towering marble columns, long harbors filled with ships, and markets where traders from distant lands exchanged gold, spices, rare metals, and ancient knowledge. For centuries the empire prospered. The fleets of Aeloria traveled across the sea and returned with wealth beyond imagination. Sailors told stories of islands covered in glowing flowers, forests where trees grew taller than castle towers, and deserts where entire cities had been buried beneath sand for thousands of years. The people of the empire believed the sea itself was guiding them toward greatness. At the center of this powerful empire ruled Emperor Caldrus, a leader both admired and feared by his people. Caldrus had come to power during a time when the empire was threatened by rival kingdoms along the northern coast. Through careful strategy and relentless determination, he expanded the empire's influence across the entire sea. By the time he had ruled for 20 years, there was not a single port along the Silver Sea that did not recognize the banners of Aeloria. Yet despite his victories, Caldrus was not satisfied. Deep within the imperial palace of Aeloria stood a library older than the empire itself. The library had been built by scholars who lived centuries before the empire had been founded, and it held scrolls and books written in languages that few people could still read. It was here that Emperor Caldrus began spending more and more of his time. He was searching for something. The emperor had become obsessed with a legend known among ancient sailors as the Heart of the Sea. According to the legend, somewhere far beyond the known waters existed an island hidden within constant storms. At the center of that island lay a crystal formed from the very power of the ocean itself. The stories claimed that whoever possessed this crystal would gain the ability to command the tides, control the storms, and rule the oceans forever. Many believed the legend was nothing more than a myth created by sailors to entertain themselves during long voyages. But Caldrus believed it was real. The emperor began sending expeditions farther and farther into unknown waters. At first, the voyages seemed harmless enough. Ships returned with maps of new islands and reports of strange sea creatures that few scholars had ever seen before. But as the years passed, the journeys grew longer and more dangerous. Some ships never returned. Others came back nearly destroyed by violent storms that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Sailors spoke of waves taller than castle walls and thunder that shook the sky for days without stopping. Yet every report only strengthened the emperor's belief that the heart of the sea truly existed. Among the many sailors serving in the imperial fleet was a young navigator named Arlen Veyer. Arlen had grown up in a small fishing village along the southern coast of the empire. From the moment he was old enough to walk along the docks, he had been fascinated by ships and the endless horizon beyond the sea. Unlike many sailors, Arlen possessed an unusual talent for reading the stars. Even on nights when clouds covered most of the sky, he could determine direction with remarkable accuracy. Because of this skill, he was eventually chosen to serve on one of the emperor's long-range exploration vessels. Arlen's ship was called the Radiant Tide, a large exploration vessel built to travel farther than any imperial ship before it. Its captain was a stern but respected commander named Captain Saradis, a man who had spent nearly 40 years sailing the Silver Sea. When Arlen first stepped aboard the Radiant Tide, he felt a mixture of excitement and unease. The mission they had been given was unlike any previous expedition. Their orders were simple: sail beyond the eastern storms and search for any sign of the legendary island. For weeks the voyage went smoothly. The sea remained calm, and the wind carried the ship steadily eastward. The crew spent their days adjusting sails, maintaining the ship, and recording every island or unusual landmark they encountered. But slowly, the sky began to change. The further east they sailed, the darker the horizon became. Clouds gathered almost constantly, and the wind began shifting unpredictably. By the time they had sailed 2 months beyond the Empire's outermost trade routes, the ocean had grown restless. Then the storms began. At first they appeared as distant flashes of lightning far ahead of the ship. But soon the radiant tide found itself sailing directly into walls of dark clouds. Waves rose higher with every passing hour, and thunder rolled across the sea like distant mountains collapsing. Even Captain Saradis began to worry. Arlen, however, noticed something strange. The storms did not move like ordinary weather. Instead, they seemed to form a massive ring around a specific point in the ocean, as if something deep within the sea itself was creating them. One night, while studying the stars between breaks in the clouds, Arlen realized something even more astonishing. The ship was sailing in circles. No matter which direction the captain ordered the sails turned, the currents slowly pushed them back toward the center of the storm. As the realization spread through the crew, fear began to grow. 3 days later, the storm suddenly stopped. The transformation was so sudden that many sailors thought they were dreaming. One moment the sky was filled with thunder and violent rain, and the next moment the clouds parted to reveal clear blue sky and calm water. Before them, rising from the sea, stood an island no map had ever recorded. Massive cliffs surrounded the island like natural walls. Waterfalls poured from high above into the ocean below, creating clouds of mist that shimmered in the sunlight. Strange white trees covered the island's interior, their leaves glowing faintly as if touched by silver light. The crew stared in silence. Captain Saradis slowly lowered his spyglass. "We found it," he whispered. The radiant tide sailed carefully toward a narrow inlet between the cliffs. As they entered the sheltered waters of the island's inner lagoon, the sailors noticed that the water itself looked different. Instead of deep blue, it shimmered with pale silver reflections that moved even when the surface was calm. Arlen felt a strange sensation in the air, almost like a quiet humming that seemed to vibrate through the water and the rocks. The crew anchored the ship near a stone shore and began exploring the island. What they found made them question everything they thought they knew about the world. Ruins covered much of the island's interior. Enormous stone structures stood partially collapsed beneath vines and moss. Some buildings were taller than the imperial palace back in Aeloria. Carved symbols covered many of the stones, written in a language none of the crew recognized. In the center of the island stood a circular temple made from smooth white stone. Inside the temple, at the very center of a vast chamber open to the sky, stood a pedestal carved from a single block of crystal. And resting upon that pedestal was the object Emperor Caldris had spent years searching for. A glowing crystal the size of a human heart. The heart of the sea. The moment Arlen stepped into the chamber, he felt the strange humming grow stronger. The crystal pulsed with soft blue light, and faint lines of energy moved across its surface like waves frozen in time. Captain Saradis approached the pedestal slowly. "Careful," Arlen said quietly. But the captain was already reaching out his hand. The moment his fingers touched the crystal, the entire island seemed to tremble. Far out in the ocean, thunder roared once again. The sky darkened within seconds as storm clouds returned faster than anyone believed possible. Lightning flashed across the horizon, and the calm lagoon outside the temple began to churn violently. The crystal brightened, its light filling the entire chamber. Arlen suddenly understood something the Emperor had not. The crystal was not meant to be taken. It was the source of the storms protecting the island. And they had just disturbed it. The ground shook violently as cracks spread across the temple floor. Outside, waves began crashing against the cliffs with incredible force. Sailors ran back toward the ship, shouting warnings as the wind returned with terrifying strength. Captain Saradis struggled to pull his hand away from the crystal. It had fused to his palm. The light grew brighter until it became almost impossible to look directly at the pedestal. Arlen realized the island itself was reacting to the crystal being touched. The ruins surrounding the temple began collapsing as the earth trembled beneath them. With a desperate effort, Saradis finally broke free from the crystal, falling backward onto the temple floor. The light instantly dimmed, but the storm outside had already begun. Arlen helped the captain to his feet, and together they ran back toward the radiant tide while the island shook behind them. The crew managed to raise anchor just as enormous waves began crashing into the lagoon. The ship barely escaped through the narrow entrance between the cliffs before the storm swallowed the island once again. Behind them, the mysterious island disappeared into clouds and lightning. Months later, the radiant tide finally returned to the capital of Aeloria. The crew delivered their reports directly to Emperor Caldrus, describing everything they had seen. The emperor listened in silence. When they finished, he asked only one question. "Where is the crystal?" Captain Saradis shook his head. "We left it where it belongs." For a long time, the emperor said nothing. Finally, he dismissed the crew and ordered the story sealed within the imperial archives. The heart of the sea would remain hidden, protected by storms that no empire could ever control. And Arlen Vea returned to the quiet southern coast where he had grown up, knowing that some powers in the world were never meant to belong to kings, empires, or men. They belonged only to the sea. Long before the modern kingdoms built their walls of stone and iron, before merchants carved roads across the continents, there existed a vast desert known as the Golden Expanse. It stretched farther than any traveler could see, a sea of sand where dunes moved slowly like waves and the sun ruled the sky with merciless heat. Many believed the desert was empty and lifeless, but ancient stories told a different truth. According to the oldest legends, a powerful civilization once thrived beneath those sands, a civilization so advanced that its cities shone like stars during the night. For generations, these stories were dismissed as myths. Travelers who crossed the Golden Expanse saw nothing but endless dunes, scattered ruins, and the skeletons of long-forgotten caravans. Yet the desert had a way of hiding its secrets carefully, burying them deeper with every passing century. In a small frontier town called Carthes, located at the edge of the desert, lived a young mapmaker named Lirin Vale. Unlike most people in the town, Lirin had never been satisfied with ordinary life. While others worked as traders, caravan guards, or merchants, he spent most of his days studying ancient maps and listening to travelers' stories. His small workshop was filled with parchment maps, strange artifacts brought from distant lands, and old books written in fading ink. Many of these books contained fragments of forgotten histories, including references to a legendary place known only as the hidden city of Oradun. According to the fragments Lirin had discovered, Oradun had once been the greatest city in the entire desert. It was said to have towers built from golden stone, canals that carried fresh water beneath the ground, and libraries filled with knowledge from civilizations across the world. Some texts even suggested that the city possessed technology and knowledge that modern scholars could barely understand. But one day, the stories said, the city vanished. No war was recorded. No invasion was mentioned. Instead, the text simply said that the desert swallowed Oradun in a single night. Most scholars believed the city had never existed at all. Lirin believed otherwise. For years he collected clues from travelers, explorers, and wandering scholars. Slowly he began to notice patterns hidden within ancient maps. Several ruins scattered across the desert seemed to form a strange geometric alignment. When he placed these locations together on a new map, they pointed toward a region of the desert that almost no caravan ever crossed. It was called the Silent Quarter. The name alone frightened many travelers. Stories claimed the winds there never stopped blowing and that compasses behaved strangely within its dunes. Some caravans that attempted to cross it had vanished without leaving any trace. For Lirin, this only made the place more fascinating. After years of preparation, he finally decided to attempt the journey himself. He joined a merchant caravan heading toward the deeper desert, offering his skills as a navigator and mapmaker in exchange for passage. The caravan leader, a seasoned desert guide named Saravik, warned him that the Silent Quarter was dangerous even for experienced travelers. But Lirin refused to change his plans. He believed the ruins of Oradun were hidden somewhere beneath those shifting dunes. The caravan traveled for weeks across the desert. During the day, the sun burned the sand so hot that the air itself shimmered like water. At night, the temperature dropped so suddenly that frost sometimes formed on metal tools. The travelers moved carefully from one oasis to the next, following ancient trade routes that had existed for centuries. Eventually, they reached the final outpost before the Silent Quarter. Beyond that point, the desert became far more unpredictable. Most of the caravan decided to turn back there, unwilling to risk the dangerous journey ahead. But Saravik, curious about Lirin's strange maps, agreed to guide a smaller group deeper into the desert. The winds began growing stronger as they traveled. Huge dunes shifted constantly, sometimes changing the entire landscape within hours. The sky often filled with fine sand carried by the wind, turning the sunlight into a dim golden haze. For several days they found nothing unusual. Then one evening, while studying the horizon through his navigation lens, Lirin noticed something strange. A perfectly straight line of dark stone protruding from the sand far in the distance. They changed direction and approached carefully. What they found was not a natural formation. It was the top of a massive stone structure buried beneath the dunes. As they dug away some of the sand, ancient carvings appeared on the stone surface. The carvings showed tall towers, flowing water, and large circular buildings surrounded by gardens. Lirin's heart began racing. The images matched the descriptions of Oradun. Encouraged by the discovery, the group continued exploring the surrounding area. Over the next 2 days they uncovered more fragments of buried structures. Broken pillars, staircases leading downward into darkness, and stone arches almost completely swallowed by the desert. But the most important discovery came during the third night. A violent sandstorm struck their camp without warning. The wind howled across the desert with terrifying force, forcing the travelers to hide inside their tents and protect their supplies. The storm lasted nearly 12 hours. When it finally passed and the sun rose again, the landscape had completely changed. Where a large dune had stood the previous day, a deep depression in the sand had appeared. At the center of that depression stood the top of a massive stone dome. It looked like the roof of a buried building. Lirin and Saravik hurried toward it. Near the base of the dome they found an opening that had been completely sealed by sand for centuries. The storm had uncovered a staircase descending into darkness. They lit torches and began descending carefully. The air inside was cool and strangely still. As they moved deeper, their torchlight revealed enormous stone corridors lined with pillars carved with the same symbols they had seen earlier on the buried ruins. After several minutes of walking, the corridor opened into a vast underground chamber. What they saw made them freeze in silence. Before them stretched an entire city hidden beneath the desert. Towering stone buildings rose from the cavern floor. Bridges connected structures across deep canals filled with still water. Crystal-like lamps hung from the cavern ceiling, reflecting faint light that somehow still glowed after centuries. The city of Oradun had never been destroyed. It had simply been buried. Lirin realized that the ancient inhabitants must have built the city underground to survive the harsh desert climate. Over time, shifting dunes above the surface must have hidden every entrance, leaving the city forgotten by the world. But as the group walked deeper into the silent streets, another question slowly emerged. Why had the people of Oradun abandoned such a magnificent place? The answer came sooner than they expected. At the center of the underground city stood a circular chamber larger than any building they had seen so far. In the middle of that chamber was a massive machine-like structure made of stone and metal, covered in symbols none of them recognized. The structure was cracked and partially broken. Lirin studied the carvings surrounding it and slowly began understanding their meaning. The machine had once controlled the city's underground water system, drawing water from deep beneath the desert and distributing it through canals and reservoirs. But something had gone wrong. The carvings showed that a powerful earthquake had damaged the structure centuries ago. Without water, the people of Oradun would not have been able to survive underground. So they had abandoned the city. Over time, the desert erased all evidence that the civilization had ever existed. Lirin spent weeks documenting everything he could inside the buried city. He carefully sketched buildings, copied ancient symbols, and mapped the entire underground layout. When he finally returned to Carthage months later, he carried proof of one of the greatest discoveries in history. The lost city of Oradun was real. And beneath the endless sands of the Golden Expanse, an entire forgotten civilization had been waiting patiently for someone curious enough to find it again.